Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 69, the Pikahuna. The episode begins with Ash wanting to actually get some training in, despite still being on Seafoam Islands, due to the fact that last episode, he couldn't get some actual genuine training in. So, he decides to do some jogging, as if that was important as opposed to Pokemon battling, and Brock and Misty follow along, them each wearing unique jogging outfits. And Misty wearing a backpack so that Togepi could come along. Ash is currently way ahead of Brock and Misty as they're trying to catch up, but Ash then is slowed down immensely when a car passes by him, and it goes so fast that it releases so much exhaust that he's fucking blinded and begins to cough. Due to not being able to see where he was going, he almost gets run over by another car who passes by on the road, but thankfully that car manages to swerve out of the way, but in doing so, it creates a massive traffic jam of fucking like 10,000 different cars. Because once the car swerved out of the way and stopped, it obviously couldn't go ahead if Ash was still blinded. The people in the back of the traffic jam obviously don't see Ash though, so they're mad as fuck, like, why the fuck are their vehicles stopped at the front? And it causes a massive argument between everyone, as everyone starts to blame each other for causing the traffic jam, and it's just utter mayhem. It gets so chaotic that Officer Jenny is forced to get involved as she rides in on her motorcycle, and she somehow manages to successfully break up the traffic jam and return everyone back to their normal selves, away from their road rage personas. She must have some pretty good convincing skills, because holy shit, they were mad. They were especially mad at Ash as well. I'm surprised that Ash didn't get fucking killed. But anyways, Officer Jenny does manage to end the traffic jam and calm everyone down, so everyone leaves with the exception of Ash and the gang, who decide to stay back and question Officer Jenny to see if she knew why there was so many people at the beach anyways, and why they all had surfboards. Like, for one, if you're at the beach, then you should probably walk down there. I don't know why you're going in cars. And two, was surfing that much of a popular sport that everyone had a surfboard? Well, Officer Jenny reveals the reason for both of these things, being that a huge wave that only appears once every 20 years, known as the Humunga Dunga, was finally approaching again, so everyone wanted to get the chance to ride it, even those who normally weren't surfers. As well as plenty of tourists, so that explained why there was so many fucking people. After hearing about the Humunga Dunga, this leads Ash and the gang to look out at the ocean to see if they could see the wave yet, but Officer Jenny clarifies that it wasn't coming until a little bit later, but the reason why they still saw so many surfers out right now was because they were trying to get practice in. Ash and the gang then notice how all of these surfers that were trying to get practice in were also carrying flags while doing so. They note that that would probably make it harder to surf, having a flag in your hand, but Officer Jenny states that it was worth the detriment to a lot of them, as they wanted to plant a flag at the top of a rock, which riding the wave successfully would bring them to. It is then that Ash and the gang spot this rock out by the surfers, and indeed notice the surfers trying to get up to it and place their flags on it. Ash and the gang further question Officer Jenny why all the surfers were so interested in placing a flag in a rock, and she reveals that it's because they wanted to try and emulate a famous surfer named Jan, who had done the same thing 40 years ago. Adding that Jan was the only one who had been able to do so in these last 40 years, as his flag was still the only flag that was visible from atop of the rock. So basically, every one of these surfers wanted the same fame that Jan had acquired, but everyone had failed to do so far. I guess Jan had fucking protagonist energy despite not being the protagonist. Despite no one else being able to emulate Jan, Ash for some reason is confident that he can, even despite having never surfed. And Brock and Misty obviously doubt him, but they still all head out to the beach as Ash begins to surf, with Brock and Misty simply suntanning as they watch. As Ash paddles out on his surfboard to the water to begin surfing, we then cut to Pikachu, who is playing with Togepi in a little pond that had formed on the beach, when he suddenly notices another Pikachu on a nearby cliff, looking out onto the waves. As his Pikachu's eyes start to glow blue, it sees a wave coming in from the horizon, and a man behind him remarks how this wave indeed looked pretty big, but it was not the big wave that he was looking for, likely insinuating that he was waiting for the Humunga Dunga. Meanwhile, back with Ash, for some reason, he was actually doing good surfing despite having never surfed before, but then he falls off his board. I guess he wasn't that good after all. He then tries again to get back up on his board, but then his foot cramps up, rendering him unable to. To make matters worse, Brock then notices a huge wave coming for Ash, and with his cramped foot, he's unable to do anything, so the wave washes over him, knocking him unconscious in the water, so he could fucking drown at any fucking moment. As if things couldn't get any fucking worse, a second wave then approaches that's even bigger, and it is about to wash over Ash and potentially fucking kill him, but thankfully, in a Deus Ex Machina moment, the man and the Pikachu with glowing blue eyes from earlier show up and save him, scooping him onto the board before the wave can hit him. With Ash saved, the man commands the Pikachu, who he has nicknamed Puka, to help direct the surfboard back to shore, as not only was this guy a good surfer, but the Pikachu was as well, as it did a whole bunch of surfing movements mimicking the trainers. The way back is decently rough, to the point where Ash becomes conscious for a little bit, although he's only conscious enough to see the Pikachu ahead of him for a few seconds before he drifts back off into unconsciousness. It's then a few more hours until Ash wakes up again, but this time he wakes up inside a bed inside of the surfer's house, with Pikachu, Brock, and Misty sitting by his bedside. Brock immediately informs Ash where he was, being the man's cabin, and tells him that the man's name was Victor, and essentially him and his Pikachu saved his goddamn life after he passed out. Victor then walks in and introduces himself to Ash, and Ash thanks him for saving his life, but Victor clarifies that the main one responsible for saving his life was his Pikachu Puka, and instructs that Ash go thank him instead, indicating that his Pikachu had a special ability that allowed him to know when waves were coming, so he was able to know that Ash was in danger and swoop in at the last second to save him. Ash happily agrees to go thank Puka, but asks where he was, as he couldn't spot him, and the man then gestures to outside of the window, where Puka was sitting on the cliff again that Pikachu had spotted him at before, looking out at the waves once again. Before Ash can get his ass out of bed though, Pikachu then goes and meets Puka up at the cliff first, and excitedly joins him at watching the sea and any coming waves. Likely in admiration due to Puka having saved Ash, and Pikachu being like, wow, this Pikachu's really fucking cool. As both Pikachus watch the sea, they are unaware that they are being watched by Team Rocket, who are underwater in their Gyarados sub and using a little scope coming out to peek out and view the cliff. They're excited due to seeing not just one, but two Pikachu this time, and decide that they were going to try and steal them both. Jessie gets so excited that she knocks James and Meowth off of their position in the Gyarados sub where they were sitting. Fucking bitch. Meanwhile, back in Victor's cabin, Misty was peacefully singing to Togepi having some tea as Brock and Ash were talking to Victor, who was about to reveal his long-ass backstory, starting with how he met his Pikachu. Essentially, one day 20 years ago, Victor was just chilling out on the beach when he saw a Pikachu approach him on a board, and the Pikachu attempted to ride a wave, but failed and was launched onto the beach directly into Victor's hand. It was then that their inseparable bond, much like Ash and his Pikachu, was formed, as Victor and Pikachu looked in each other's eyes. When Victor looked in Pikachu's eyes, though, he was shocked to see that they were blue, and he later found out the reason for this, explaining Pikachu's special ability. Essentially, it could sense whenever a wave was incoming, and its body and eyes glowed blue, even its tail, when it sensed it. He adds that the severity of the wave affected how blue his Pikachu would glow. So like if there was just a little baby bitch wave, maybe only the eyes would glow, but if there was a huge wave, then the entire body would be blue, essentially making him a fucking shiny Pikachu at that point. Better than the actual shiny Pikachu. Victor then reveals that because of this ability, him and Puka have been able to conquer every wave that they have ridden, with the exception of one, being the Humungadunga. Further stating how impressive that was, as they had ridden every big wave that had come in the last 20 years. So not only had they ridden every wave, they were successful at riding every wave. This is why they were so insistent on riding it, as they had a fucking perfect reputation otherwise, and they wanted to make sure that they had a 100% perfect reputation. Misty, who had stopped singing to Togepi to listen to Victor's story at this point. Hell, probably she didn't even need to sing Togepi to sleep. The story probably put it to sleep. But anyways, she had stopped singing to Togepi and had instead directed her attention to 3 photos on the wall. One was a photo of Victor when he was a kid, one was a photo of Victor with his Puka, and another was a photo of Victor with someone else. Victor clarifies that the first photo of him as a kid was taken 40 years ago, revealing his age, and he then clarifies that the second picture was taken 20 years ago, around the time when he first met Puka. This leads Brock and Ash to question when the third photo was taken, and they wonder who the person beside him was. Much to everyone's shock, Victor reveals that the man in the picture was none other than Jan, the infamous surfer who no one had been able to replicate. This leads him to give yet another exposition dump, this time starting all the way back to when he was a kid 40 years ago, before Jan had completed his Humungadunga surf. Everyone in town was in awe of Jan, essentially treating him like a god for the surfing that he did. Victor was one of these people, and reveals that the entire reason why he began his surfing career in the first place was because of Jan and wanting to be just like him. He then even further states that, despite being a great surfer now, he was not a great surfer in the beginning. He would constantly fail every single wave he tried to ride. But it was then that Jan came up to him one day when he was surfing and essentially encouraged him to do his best and gave him a whole bunch of crash courses on how to surf. And it was because of this that Victor was able to become the great surfer that he was now. Victor and Jan would practice every day together and eventually became very close. Though despite this, Victor thought that there was always something on Jan's mind that Jan wouldn't tell him, like he was waiting for something but was not going to speak of it. It was eventually revealed that what he was waiting for was the Humungadunga. This led Victor to explain his theory of how he thought that maybe it meant that Jan could sense the waves just as Puka could, as there was no way that he could have known that this wave was coming unless he had some fucking divine powers, as it just came out of nowhere one day. But despite this, Jan seemed to know about it and was entirely prepared as he headed out to sea to go surf it, with everyone in the town gathering to watch in excitement. This next part of the story was what we already knew, being that Jan successfully managed to ride the wave and plant his flag at the top of the mountain, much to everyone's joy. The last part of the story was what happened to Jan afterwards, though, as Victor reveals that once Jan had reached shore, he decided to go on a trip across the world in a boat, and he decided to leave his surfboard with Victor, stating that it was his now, and he wanted Victor to use it to do the Humungadunga wave himself, stating that he believed he could do it. Jan then left, leaving Victor alone with the surfboard, and determined to ride the Humungadunga just as Jan had. Essentially, he knew that he was chosen as Jan's successor, and he didn't want to let him down. Revealing that that's why he was sad, sitting alone on the beach one day when Puka showed up, because that was the day that he had finally decided to try surfing the Humungadunga after 20 years of practice, but he had unfortunately failed. And was so ashamed of his failure and letting Jan down that he was contemplating quitting surfing, but added that when he saw Puka, it reminded him of how much he loved it and reignited his determination to successfully surf the Humungadunga, despite his failure. He's been waiting all this time for a chance to finally attempt it again, and now he was going to be able to. This time, with Puka. Ash responded to this long-ass exposition by wishing Victor good luck, but was then cut off when he heard both Pikachu and Puka cry out. They were still outside watching the sea, like earlier, and Team Rocket had shown up to capture them just as they were intending to, already having managed to capture them inside their Gyarados sub's claws before Ash and the gang could run outside. Because of this, they get extremely cocky and recite their motto to Ash and the gang as soon as they arrive. jumping up in the air from their Gyarados sub to do some aerial tricks as well, but they then realize that they had nothing to land on, so they simply fall back into their Gyarados sub, cutting off their motto. The grabbers then transport both Pikachus into a glass container and bring the glass container inside the Gyarados sub, leading Jesse and James to then set off in their Gyarados sub underwater, hoping that due to them disappearing underwater, Ash and the gang wouldn't be able to find them and follow them. As the sub moves across the sea, the Pikachus try their hardest to break out of the container they were in, but the electricity attacks do absolutely nothing. Not even because it was made of rubber or nothing. I guess the container was just that strong. As Team Rocket were taunting them for this, they then looked out the window and spotted several actual Gyarados, not more submarines, approaching them. This caused James to panic, as he stated that the Gyarados were currently in their mating season, likely knowing due to being the one to make the Gyarados sub, so he probably knew some shit about Gyarados. Team Rocket are obviously immensely scared, as they've had many encounters with Gyarados beforehand, such as back on the St. Dan, right? So they try their best to drive the submarine out of the Gyarados' path, but the Gyarados run into it anyways, and make Team Rocket unable to move in the sub, as they then use Hyper Beam, sending it blasting into the sky, out of the water, sending Team Rocket blasting off as the sub explodes. Ash and the gang and Victor spot this, as right after Team Rocket had dived down, they immediately got into Victor's boat and chased after them on the surface. Due to Ash and the gang being there, they spot the Pikachu's cage, which had been blown out of the Gyarados sub in the explosion, as it starts falling down into the water. The cage then shatters due to the impact of the explosion, leaving both Pikachu plummeting down into the water. Ash sends out his Bulbasaur, who's fortunately able to save his Pikachu by using a Vine Whip, but as for Puka, he's still falling into the water. And eventually does, and is about to drown, causing Victor to worry immensely and decide to take matters into his own hands as he grabs his surfboard and jumps off the boat to go save Puka. Knowing obviously that the boat wouldn't be able to pick Puka up, someone would have to go in there, pick him up, and then toss him in first, right? So that's why he essentially sacrificed himself to go save Puka. But he does inform Ash and the gang to make sure that they keep the boat close by, so that once Victor saves Puka, they can just easily get back on the boat. But unfortunately, it's then that the waves start to get rougher, and this forces Brock to drive the boat away back to the land, because they were about to capsize otherwise. Damn, Brock, you're really just willing to leave Puka and Victor like that? I mean, I know that the boat was going to capsize, but I think you could have waited a few seconds. As a few seconds was all it took for Victor to successfully surf out to Puka and grab him and place him on the surfboard. However, with the boat now gone, they were simply both stranded at sea on their own on the surfboard. Victor prepares to try braving the waves with Puka and return to shore on their own. But then, Puka begins to glow blue. Not just its eyes, not just its tail, but its entire fucking body. This signified that the biggest wave was coming. The Humunga Dunga, baby! Soon after noticing Pikachu start to glow blue, Victor looked out on the horizon and indeed confirmed that he could see the Humunga Dunga coming and prepared to ride it. If they did so successfully, it would certainly be a way to return to shore. Meanwhile, back on shore, Ash and the gang had arrived to see Officer Jenny warning everyone to take higher ground, as they were all aware that the Humunga Dunga was now on its way, and they were fucking scared that it was going to be so big that it would flood the land. Everyone obliged to Officer Jenny's orders, as they all watched the Humunga Dunga approach from a high cliff. Ash and the gang were distraught, as they realized that if the Humunga Dunga was here now, Victor and Puka had either been swept away and killed by it, or they had missed it entirely, both being terrible scenarios. But just then, as the Humunga Dunga gets extremely close, they are able to spot Victor and Puka riding the wave. They were doing it! Ash and the gang cheered in happiness as the Humunga Dunga proceeded to reach the rock where Jan had planted his flag, leading Victor to pull out his flag that he had thankfully had with him when he went to save Puka. It was likely probably attached to the surfboard. And then, the surfboard flies off the wave over top of the rock, putting Victor in the perfect position to plant the flag into the rock, thereby completing his goal after all these years. He'd done it! Finally someone other than Jan had placed a flag into the rock. Let's go! Everyone continues to cheer in absolute amazement at the fact that there was finally a successor to Jan. As Victor and Pikachu descended from the wave and took a moment to stare in amazement at the rock before returning to shore. Victor had finally made Jan proud as his successor. Well, I mean, we don't know that for sure, as Jan never shows up again or anything. I think this would have been the perfect opportunity to have Jan show up at the last second and congratulate Victor, but whatever. He gets congratulations from Ash and the gang, and that's enough, I guess. I guess he's getting congratulations from a whole crowd of people, too. And Victor certainly notices this crowd, as he then goes up to two of the kids standing there, and proceeds to give them his board, just as Jan did to him, and tells them the same thing that Jan told him, which is, hey, I want you guys to ride the Humunga Dunga and do it just like I did. The kids happily declare that they would try their best, as Brock, Misty, and Ash watch all this go down, remarking how similar it was to the whole situation with Jan and Victor. Victor had just appointed his own successors. The episode then ends with a shot of Victor and Jan's flags atop the rock right next to each other. Just kidding, we get one more scene revealing what happened to Team Rocket. When they blasted off, they had unfortunately landed back in the ocean with half of their Gyarados sub, and the Gyarados had spotted this and had begun circling the Gyarados sub. Please, Gyarados, eat them so that they don't come back next episode.